Hi, everybody. Welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time to this channel. I'm Dr. Alan Johnson, and on this channel, I talk about the mind, well-being, productivity, and change for thinkers, makers, and everyone in between. And today, I want to talk about that probably worryingly common experience that we have when we have all of the ideas, all of the aspirations, all of the even the experience that we need, but we're we're missing the momentum. We don't have the drive or the fire beneath us. How often does that seem to be the case? How often do the mornings or afternoons just slip by, or your big plans evaporate, and the next thing you know, the big vision seems to have just been blown out the window or completely disappeared. Today, I'm going to explore something that I think is really important, really sacred, and that we don't talk about enough. And it's about the structure that we bring to our own days and to our own spiritual practices and to our own development. This isn't about that, type of rigid, soul flattening type of structure, but a kind of structure that actually brings a greater sense of freedom. It brings that freedom to shape your life the way that you want and to live your life the way that you want. And this is what I want to explore today. I first want to talk a little bit about why this type of structure isn't a prison. It isn't something we're trapped in, but we should really begin to think of it as a portal, as an opportunity for us to move from the place that we are at now to the place that we intend to go in the future. I'm then going to speak a little bit more about the invisible architecture that sits behind spiritual and creative maturity. So how this type of structure that we create in our lives through our rituals and rhythms and routines brings a greater sense of spiritual maturity, brings a greater sense of creative maturity, and how those things can operate together. Then I'll talk about how we can begin to install new habits, not as chores, not as things to tick off a list, but as that type of portal, as that type of initiation through our day and through that full embodiment of our lives. And then finally, I'll wrap this up with a number of actionable tools that you can take away. A few of these are really counterintuitive and are a little bit different to what the self-help books out there say today. So definitely stay for those tips at the end. But before we get there, I want to talk a little bit about why this type of structure isn't a prison, it doesn't constrain us, why it actually gives us a sense of freedom, why it creates that portal for us within our days. Because I used to think of freedom meaning just that complete avoidance of routine. I was really resistant to regular routines because it felt to me like that spontaneity was somehow more alive, it was more spiritual, it was more embodied. And, that's not an uncommon experience because many of us grew up associating structure with, maybe first of all, that school bell or rules at home, or religious dogma, or later on, the 9 to 5 routines of work. But over time, especially through developing my own contemplative spiritual practice, I've realized that that's not really the real way to think of it, because structure is what turns our ideas of who we are and how we want to live into reality. So when we resist structure because we confuse it with control, or we resist structure because we are afraid of authority, we are missing out on a form of lived wisdom that we are creating for ourselves. So when we are fearful of authority, when we are fearful of external structure, and then we throw out the structure that we create in our lives, we throw out a regular fitness routine, we throw out a meditation routine because we think that that is going to cure our wounds and upsets from childhood. That teacher that told you that you were never going to succeed, or that church that you went to that gave you messages that you weren't good enough or you weren't going to be accepted. Those things might have happened to us early in our lives, but that doesn't mean that we have to resist the structure we create for ourselves. Structure doesn't limit us, structure doesn't control us. Structure channels our energy in a really, really powerful way. When that energy is channeled with intention, when we know who we want to be and how we want to live our lives, and we are setting out and following the routines and the rituals and the habits to do that, even those, most mundane habits, we're creating an opportunity for becoming new people and becoming exactly the people that we intend to be. We're not escaping the world by forming rigid boundaries around us. We are enabling ourselves to enter into it more fully. So I want to talk now about what's kind of going on behind the scenes here psychologically. How this ability to lean into and accept structure in our lives and to give ourselves over to the healthy, supportive habits and routines that make us stronger in mind, body, and spirit, create a form of spiritual maturity and creative maturity that we need to develop sooner or later in our lives. We will come to that form of spiritual maturity at some point, but maybe our lives will be more richly lived and fuller if we come to that in our 20s and 30s rather than our 80s or 90s. Because there's a phrase that I often return to in my teaching and coaching: spiritual maturity over spiritual excitement. There's so much out there on YouTube, on Instagram, everywhere that tries to get us spiritually excited. And excitement is fine. It's a spark. And that gets us excited, whether it's that weekend retreat or that new crystal grid that we've created or a new teacher that we've come across. That's fine. That's great. But spiritual excitement creates a spark that burns out. That hint of inspiration that we get from a retreat, from a book, from a deep conversation that, in the moment we think is going to change us forever. What happens then? Well, life resumes and we are pulled back into, the rise and fall of inboxes and emotional reactivity and social scrolling and self-doubt, whether it's subtle or profound. So what we don't need is more peak experiences. We probably have enough of those already. What we need is the spiritual maturity to continue to sit with those senses of awareness and connection every single day. And every spiritual tradition speaks of this type of routine in some sort of way. So the Benedictine monastics had ora et labora, so prayer and work, and it created a whole rhythm for their day. Notice they weren't just praying and meditating all day, they were also working and tilling the soil and transcribing books and doing lots of other stuff as well. In Zen Buddhism, there's a really, really quite elaborate system of structures of sitting, of bowing, of walking, of reading that all flow in harmony and create sort of scaffold for transformation. So the types of structures and routines that I'm talking about, not only do they not limit us or control us or lock us in a box, they create the scaffolding for transformation. And that scaffolding is really, really missing in our modern lives. Today, we are desperately scaffold deficient because we have been so fearful of the systems and structures of power that have dominated for centuries. And we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. We have thought that all forms of authority, all forms of control, all forms of structure and discipline and routine are inherently bad. Many are. And it's so important that in the 20th and 21st century, we began to reckon with many of these horrors of our past. But this doesn't mean that structure, order, routine, ritual, and discipline are inherently bad themselves. So how do we bring that type of strong, healthy discipline into our own lives? This is where things really begin to get personal. What if habits? So what if doing yoga 5 days a week? What if having a green juice when you wake up in the morning? What if you tend to your kombucha SCOBY every Sunday night? What if these types of healthy, supportive structures weren't a list of tasks to get through, but sort of initiatory thresholds that you cross? Because we talk a lot on this channel about thresholds, those moments in our lives when we cross from one place to another in an initiatory sense, that we grow and we change, and when we do something or we overcome something or when we emerge through something, we have been changed by it because we have crossed over that threshold. And I oftentimes speak of these as, the quite big thresholds that we have in our lives. But each of these small routines and rituals and elements of the structure of our lives are those little mini micro thresholds that we can cross. And when approached in this type of contemplative manner, rituals and routines become just that. They become moments of initiation. So, an example of this, I used to treat journaling, or specifically my morning pages practice from Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way, I used to treat it like a productivity tool. So to my mind, it was a way to check in. It was something I had to do in the morning. It was, important for me succeeding and getting ahead and getting all that unconscious stuff out of my mind. Do you see what's going on there? It became a task. Now I think about it a little bit differently. It's now an opportunity to show up and meet with my soul in the morning, something that is not a task to solve or to complete, but an opportunity to listen. And morning pages have been with me for over 20 years now. 25 years now. So they've been around for a long time for me. But that was really the only part of my morning routine for many years, because I avoided any other forms of routine because they felt forced. To meditate every morning and to meditate every evening felt like, I was being limited by forces beyond myself, and I didn't like it. But over the last few years, I've begun to realize that, these really are portals for beginning my day in a different way. And I think that there's a reason that really all religious and spiritual traditions see the morning as a unique time of day, because that's where you set the context for your entire day. And if we don't anchor the day with that, that sacred checking in, that sacred rhythm, the day just floats off and all our big dreams, all of our big plans get completely lost. So what I'm saying here is, don't think of habits as behaviors. Think of them as rituals of return. Our moments when we are returning to that sense of clarity, to that sense of presence, and to that reconnection with our deeper values. So when we show up on our yoga mats, when we drive to the gym, when we make that green smoothie, whatever those healthy habits are, when we are doing them, they're not just positive behaviors. They are reminders to us of that clarity that we have felt before. And that's what's important. That's how we continue to cultivate that clarity in our lives. But we need to get practical here. And this is the final section I'm going to talk about. How do we take these types of ideas and translate them into our busy lives. Your day is super busy. I know that. My day is super busy. I'm sure you know that as well. So how do we create these types of powerful, productive structures that don't feel burdensome, but feel like moments of return and initiation? So here are some gentle ways to do this. First of all, I call it the rule of three. Have 3 mini rituals throughout the day. 3 anchoring rituals, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, one in the evening. So I've spoken about this in other videos, and it's amazing how much 30 seconds in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening can really help you focus and center what you need to do. So, for example, what I mean by this is in the morning, every morning, light a candle and say an intention for what you want the day to be or who you intend to be on that day. Or wake up and drink a glass of water slowly, or wake up and meditate. It doesn't matter what you do, but if you have a structured morning habit that maybe takes 30 seconds or maybe 5 minutes, that is going to set your day off in a very, very different way. Do the same thing around midday. It doesn't have to be exactly the same activity. It might be going outside for a 5-minute walk, or that might be when you go to the gym, or you might do sit-ups or press-ups or whatever it is. Reconnect to your clarity and presence midday, and then do a small ritual to bring structure to the end of the day as well. So checking in beginning, middle, and end of the day provides a huge amount of structure. Second suggestion I have here. I'm sure that all of you have, we all have read James Clear's book, Habit Stack, or Atomic Habits. And that's where he talks about habit stacking, where you build on a new habit you want to develop onto something that you already do. And that's great. That's a great way to build new habits. But what if that new habit that we're adding on to something that we already do is a form of spiritual centering? So what if when we brush our teeth in the morning, we practice noticing the sensations? What if when we're boiling the kettle for a tea or coffee, we are visualizing our younger self and sending them love? What if when we open our laptop or get into the office, we inwardly affirm, may I be of service? Our habits and our structures don't have to be outwardly productive. Atomic Habits is concerned with being outwardly productive. What if we are inwardly connected as well, and finding ways to build those moments of connection into our structure? And the third thing I want to suggest here is to track your feelings, not just your completion of the habits in your structure. So it can be really, really good to track our habits, whether it's on a spreadsheet or a journal. Bullet journaling is great for this, or on an app. There's loads of habit tracking apps. Just tracking whether we do something or not isn't giving us a lot of useful data. So what I'm going to suggest instead is that you begin to track the habit that you want to start doing, whether it's meditating for 5 minutes in the morning, or having green tea when you wake up, or going for a 15-minute walk when you get home from work or on your lunch break. Track the habit, track when you complete it, and then, this is the most important part, track how you were feeling before and after that habit. Because that way you begin to notice the emotional transformations that the structure you're bringing into your life is creating for you. You're not forcing yourself into anything. You are cultivating and sustaining an inner relationship with yourself. So let me know in the comments how you're getting on with this idea of structure, and maybe a little bit about the resistance you've had to structure in your own life. You might think that, you don't resist structure, you don't resist order in this way. Trust me when I say, if you begin to think on this and reflect on this, you will realize that many of your self-sabotaging patterns have been coming from the fact that you are resisting order and structure. So allow yourself to explore that. Be curious about that. Share your thoughts and reflections in the comments. And if this is the type of video that would resonate with someone else that a partner, a family member, someone at work, a friend, send it their way. because coming into a different relationship with a structure that we create in our own lives really does give us the opportunity to live the lives that we were meant to lead. I'll see you next time.